I'm Philip Wilson. I'm directing The Importance of Being Earnest and Travesties at the Old Rep this autumn. As a director, one of the things that always fascinates me is the inspiration behind writing plays. And I gather that in the case of Travesties, Tom Stoppard was reading a biography of James Joyce, and he came across a little reference to the fact that when James Joyce was in Zurich around 1917, he directed a production of The Importance of Being Earnest. And we might not know about this were it not for the fact that unfortunately it led to a court case because the actor he employed to play Algy took him to court for the money that he'd spent on clothes, costumes for the production. And in turn, James Joyce, obviously in a fit of pique, tried to sue him for the money for tickets that he'd given to the actor. So this was obviously something that Tom Stoppard was interested in, but being Tom Stoppard, that wasn't quite enough. And around that time in Zurich Lenin was based there, thinking about his ideas that then led on to his rule in Russia. And also Tristan Tzara, who was an important figure in what's called the Dadaist movement, a sort of branch of surrealism, was there thinking of his ideas that became known as Dada. And so Tom Stoppard puts all of these together in Travesties and filters them through the memory of an older version of this man, Henry Carr, who played Algy. And so what one gets is a wonderful conflation of little bits of Earnests with little bits of Dadaist art theory, which generally involves chopping up bits of Shakespeare poems and reading out the words in other orders, and also bits of Lenin thinking about his ideas and his return to Russia. The fact that it's set in Zurich is quite interesting during the First World War, because Zurich was a neutral space, but in this point and in this place, Stoppard realises that there are all sorts of other revolutions going on, an artistic revolution in terms of Dada, a literary revolution in terms of modernism, James Joyce writing Ulysses, his most famous work, and Lenin on the point of political revolution in Russia. And so I think it's a bit of a masterstroke on Birmingham's part to put the two plays together, both Stoppard's response, which is like a kind of bonkers, exploded version of Earnest. When I was asked to do the two plays, I was very excited because obviously Birmingham Rep's out and about across the city as the building is reconstructed. And the Old Rep, which is where that theatre started, was obviously a place in which actors were part of repertory companies, something we don't really have as much of these days. And so the idea of in rep at the Old Rep really appealed to me by putting these two plays together. It's going to be quite a busy rehearsal period because, as I said, I have a company of 8 actors who will perform in both plays. And some of the comparisons between those characters are very interesting. The character who plays Carr will play Algy, as he did in James Joyce's production of The Importance of Being Earnest, and the character who plays Tzara will play Jack. And I can imagine that Tom Stoppard rubbed his hands together with glee as he discovered that the actor who played Jack in that production of Earnest was called Tristan, as Tristan Tzara was. The most wackiest bit of doubling is that in Travesties, the James Joyce figure shades across into Lady Bracknell, and Stoppard also discovered that one of James Joyce's name was Augustine, but through a mistake in his christening he was called Augusta, which is Lady Bracknell's first name. So there's all sorts of parallels that are put together. So those 8 actors will be kept pretty busy. It's also quite a challenge creating sets for these two plays. Obviously one needs to honour the locations and the necessities of those individual plays. Earnest has 3 locations, a London flat, a garden in the countryside, and then inside the house near that garden. And Travesties is set both in the public library in Zurich and in Carr's flat. And the idea that Colin Faulkner, who's the designer, and I have come up with is that in some ways Carr's flat looks very similar to Algy's flat in The Importance of Being Earnest. And then other little bits kind of cross over. And through the costumes too, we've tried to make sure that the fabrics that we use for 1895 for The Importance of Being Earnest are used again in a different cut, in a different fashion for 1917 for Zurich. It's probably going to be a bit of a crush backstage because there's a lot of furniture for all these individual scenes. But we have been doubling up, and we've created an environment in which we hope these two plays can both sit together but also sit apart, so that audiences can enjoy each play in turn, or if you have a marathon matinee, you can watch one in the afternoon and one in the evening. Tom Stoppard is an extraordinarily intelligent man, and his plays are full of ideas, but one of the things that really attracts me is that those ideas are absolutely anchored in feelings and in people. And certainly for Travesties, you don't need to know about Joyce or Lenin or Zara, or indeed very much about the importance of being earnest, other than the fact that it's about various people in love and there's a handbag. In terms of Earnest, obviously it's one of the best known and best loved, most celebrated comedies in the English language almost. I approach it with some trepidation simply because it's so well known, and there are many people in the audience who will know lines, not just the very famous one, A Handbag, but all sorts of other ones. But for me, I've directed Private Lives, another incredibly well-known play, and for me the process is the same as with any play. You approach it by immersing yourself into the period, by doing research, and by analysing what those characters are doing. And in Earnest, it's two pairs of young people in their late 20s finding love. There's also rather wonderfully two slightly older people, Prism and Chasuble, without giving too much away about the plot, who have a little twinkle in their eyes too. So for me, it's about honouring Wilde's extraordinarily epigrammatical wit. I think part of the enjoyment is listening to those wonderfully polished and balanced sentences, but anchoring that in something that feels real rather than the sort of filigree, this artificiality of language. Visually, we've really gone to town on both productions. Earnest, we're drawing on all the expertise at Birmingham in terms of wig making and costume making, props, sound effects, but the wonderful composer Paul Englishby, who's working on both shows. So I think one can say there'll be a lot of everything, because we have a man playing Lady Bracknell. Obviously there'll be some work there on that female impersonation, but we've really researched the costumes of the time and come up with some fantastic fabrics from the turn of the century, which will then be referenced across into Travesties. Travesties has everything, I have to say. It has a little bit of magic too, so there'll be some magic tricks, there's some dancing. Tom Stoppard's referencing music hall as well, which again seems very appropriate for the old rep. So there's a little bit of music hall that goes on, and a bit of singing, a bit of dancing. And for Earnest, obviously a celebration of that very English comedy by referencing music from the turn of the century, that very lush, romantic music. Staging these two plays together is certainly going to be a very exciting process for me, and there's a real buzz backstage at the theatre and in the offices because the two plays together require a lot of everything, a lot of costumes, a lot of wigs, a lot of sound effects, a lot of props. And so it really will be the first major costume event of the autumn season. And it's not just about those two plays, there will be all manner of other events. There'll be some post-show discussions and some pre-show chats, alongside some play readings of new plays by local writers and further afield, and readings of plays that resonate with the two themes. So basically there's going to be a lot going on in September and October.